to mute your mic, person.
Hi, so we have people waiting to come in now. Jason, I'll start letting people in the next minute or so, yeah.
Okay.
Just to confirm that we're live on YouTube now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've made you host.
You made me host. Okay, thank you. Hi to all those that are joining. Hi, Sister Pat. You okay?
Hi, Grafton. Yes, I'm good. How are you and family? How's Jazz?
Yeah, everyone's good. Everyone's fine. Thank you.
Good. Settled in now?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Most indeed.
Afternoon,
Right, we're just
Jason.
sorry. Yeah, hi. We'll just wait for some more people to join, and then we'll start the program.
Okay, I'm just going to disappear for a minute then.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll give it another 5 minutes and then we'll start the program. So just wait for more people to join.
Have you got some music we can play?
I've got some music.
Alison, free to mute,
What
disconnect
music
your
you want?
camera if you want.
Song?
At the moment, yeah, great.
So do you have any song requests, or should I just play anything?
You can sing if you got a great voice.
No, I can't sing. I can play something from the speaker.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Any request, anyone? Put in the chat if you anyone got a song request. I don't know.
We trust your decision.
Okay.
Hi, Sister Evans.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
I'm fine, thank you.
Yeah, long time no see.
Yep, very long time.
Mm.
You doing all right?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Good.
Just having some technical difficulties.
We'll start the meeting in a couple of minutes.
Parents have many questions about how their children play video games.
There's a place I know I love to be, nearer to the heart of God, where I find my peace and joy within, nearer to the heart of God. I'm falling deeper love with Jesus. I'm in love with Him. Lord, I'm in love with You. Keep falling deeper love with Jesus. He's the best I've ever known. There's a place I'd love to be forever, where I'll see the face of God, where Jesus, my Redeemer, lives, nearer to the heart of God. I'm falling deeper love with Jesus. I'm in love with Him. Lord, I'm in love with You. Keep falling deeper love with Jesus. He's the best I've ever known. Ta-da-da, 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 deeper love with Jesus. I'm in love with Him. Lord, I'm in love with You. He's the best I'll ever know.
Keep falling deeper,
Falling deeper with Jesus.
Nobody can love you better
with Him.
Nobody
Lord,
else
I'm
can
in
do
love
it with you. I keep falling
deeper with Jesus.
You're the best of
He's the best I've
ever, ever.
He's the best I've ever known. He's the best I've
Thank you for that, sister. Wonderful music. What we'll do, we'll pass the video on to Jason Knight, who will do the welcome.
Okay, happy Sabbath, everyone, and welcome to our health and well-being session on mental health in the church. I am Dr. Jason Knight, and I am one of your co-hosts for this evening. So our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Alison Awuku, who is an author, qualified counselor, psychotherapist, coach, and mentor. Her areas of counseling and psychotherapy are extensive and includes anger management, addictions, anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. Some of the therapies that she offers are behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, personal centered therapy, as well as other areas of mental health and well-being. Now, I am sure Dr. Awuku will elaborate on her areas of practice and how she can be contacted at the end. I'll encourage you to submit your questions via the systems in place so that we may have a fruitful discussion during this presentation. Before I hand you over to Dr. Awuku, I will lead us out in a short word of prayer. Shall we bow our heads? Father, thank you so much for allowing us to be able to have this online meeting where we're able to discuss any challenges that mental health can pose for an individual. We're living through times that are extremely difficult, and millions of people around the world are struggling. And more so, a lot of people are struggling because they're not sure exactly what it means, what is that they're experiencing. And thank you for Dr. Awuku for assisting us today in helping us to recognize the signs and symptoms of mental health challenges, and for us to be able to recognize how it is that we might make an intervention for ourselves, as well as how we can go about making an intervention for other people around us.
Okay, I think we've lost Jason there. His video seems to have stuck. So what I will do now, we'll pass you on to Sister Alison, who will introduce herself and present the program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you to Jason for that introduction. There's just one slight point of correction on the introduction. I'm not yet a doctor, but yeah, all of the other qualifications are correct, apart from the fact that I'm not a doctor just yet. But yeah, thank you so much, Manchester South, for having me on today to talk about a topic that I know is close to a lot of people's hearts. Mental health is something that we all experience, and it's at this moment in time is quite an important subject. because there are a lot of people whose mental health are affected, especially due to the recent pandemic that we've all experienced globally. So mental health is a very important subject, and it's pleasing to see that the church is eager to engage in these discussions about mental health. And I'm hoping that we will all learn, benefit, and share in today's program. I will just share my screen. So what's going to happen is I'll speak, I'll go through a few slides, and I'll have intervals in which people can ask questions. If you've got any questions to ask, you can ask questions in those intervals, but then there will be an opportunity again, hopefully at the end of the presentation, to have a bit more of a discussion and ask a few more questions. Okay. Okay, so mental health in the church. We're talking about mental health, aware of the fact that mental health is not just something that's experienced by people outside of the church, but everyone has mental health, and everyone has the ability to suffer from poor mental health. So let's start then by having a look at what mental health is. If we said mental health, what is it? We know that, the term mental health has been spoken about a lot, especially in the last couple of years. We've had politicians, we've had celebrities, we've had members of the royal family trying to raise awareness of mental health, and even by talking about their own mental health and encouraging people to pay attention to their mental health. But let's start with what is it? What's mental health? Well, basically, in a nutshell, mental health is about our emotional, psychological well-being. It's about our ability to cope with certain stresses in life. It's about our ability to be creative, our ability to laugh, our ability to play and to work, and to do that against sometimes a backdrop of challenging events. That's basically, in a nutshell, what mental health is. So when we talk about mental health and we start to think about, good mental health, poor mental health, what does that actually mean? What does good look like? Well, good mental health will mean we have an ability to cope when things become a bit challenging, that these things do not overwhelm us to the point where we're unable to function on a day-to-day basis. Good mental health means that we are able to think logically, we're able to be creative, we're able to use our minds and use our brains in a constructive manner, and that the stresses that happen in our lives are not so overwhelming emotionally and psychologically that they start to take their toll as well on our physical well-being. So, we start to get a picture of mental health and good mental health being quite key, being quite crucial, being quite important in our lives. And so when we think about mental health, a lot of people are thinking then about poor mental health. A lot of people are thinking about when things have gone wrong psychologically and people are not able to cope. But, it's worth spending a few minutes just to think about how does it come about? Because a lot of people suffer poor mental health, and it's a known fact that globally, 1 in 4 people will suffer from poor mental health at some point in their lifetime. And, people who are Christians, people who have some sort of faith or who are in the church are not excluded from this number. Indeed, people in the church, a lot of people suffer from poor mental health. It might not be talked about as much because there's somewhat a focus on faith and a sort of an expectation that, you know, having some form of faith or belief in God will solve everything. But just like we have, you know, physical health, and just like sometimes things could go wrong, things can also go wrong with our mental health. We have within us a brain which we might not see, but it's there. And sometimes when things happen in our environment, then the brain, parts of the brain are not able to function as effectively as they normally would. And so that starts to affect our mental well-being. So talking about some of the factors or how poor mental health may come about, I've just got a few things on the screen. That's not exhaustive. Things like abuse. Abuse goes on all the time in our homes, in our communities, physical abuse, mental abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse. Abuse can significantly impact on a person's mental health. And then we've got behaviors that people learn that are not necessarily positive behaviors, are not necessarily good behaviors. That the young people we have around us, the children we have around us, learn a lot from the examples that they see from the older ones. And so a lot of behaviors that we exhibit are learned, and not all of these behaviors are good or constructive or positive. And that can very easily bring about poor mental health. And then we've got biological makeup. Some people are more predisposed to poor mental health because of their biological makeup, perhaps because certain chemicals in the brain are not balanced. And so they're susceptible, they're more predisposed to getting poor mental health. And so biological makeup, chemical imbalance is a risk factor. We've also got societal and cultural pressures. A lot of us are from different parts of the world and subscribe to different social, cultural norms. And sometimes these come with expectations that certain individuals may not be able to keep up or may not be able to manage. And there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of expectations to do perhaps things that we don't understand or we're not comfortable with. And ultimately, an accumulation of that could result in poor mental health. And then we have things like internal pressures, which are things like looking at how we perceive ourselves, the concept that we have of ourselves, our self-worth, our self-esteem. Normally, people who suffer poor mental health have very low self-esteem or perceive themselves in a very negative light. We have things like loss as well, loss, grief, bereavement, loss of a job, loss of a home, loss of relationships, loss of a loved one. All of those things can contribute to poor mental health. And then we've got certain insecurities. At the moment, we're living in a period of uncertainty. We're living through a pandemic where, you know, there's a lot of fear. People are thinking, am I going to get ill from this thing? The future is not certain. I don't feel like I'm in control, and things are, you know, uncertain. The future is uncertain. And those insecurities can bring about or can contribute to poor mental health. And then again, we have things like loneliness. A lot of us will be able to relate to the fact that loneliness can take us to a place where we feel that, you know, we don't have support. We don't have the support network that we need around us. As human beings, we're social beings, and we need to be able to have relationships where we can help and support each other. But without that, we become lonely. And we'll see later, it's a bit like a vicious cycle. You have the loneliness, which causes poor mental health, but poor mental health could also result in loneliness as well. So those are just some of the few of the factors that can contribute to poor mental health. Like I said, it's not exhaustive. There are many factors, there are many things that can contribute, but it's just to get our minds thinking so that, you know, we are more aware when we start to feel excessive anxiety, when we start to feel quite stressed, you know, we can start to think, okay, which one of these factors or other factors are contributing or are making us feel like our mental well-being is not in very good shape. So moving on to looking at some of the common mental health problems that people experience. Now, you know, it's worth saying here that, you know, people will, poor mental health will manifest differently in different people. So, you know, just because somebody has certain anxiety disorders and you know, manifested in one way doesn't mean that everybody else is going to follow suit. It doesn't mean that everybody else is going to show the same signs or have the same symptoms. But it's very important that we start to understand the sort of extent of mental health problems that are out there, because there are quite a few, and just a general awareness of the type of mental health problems we have can go quite a long way. It's not so that people can self-diagnose. It's not so that people can determine for themselves that, you know, this is the mental health issue I'm having. It's more so that people can understand that there's a difference in the various mental health problems out there. And when they start to see signs or symptoms of any one of them, then they can talk to their GP or talk to a mental health professional and try and get some help. So we've got things like anxiety disorders. So within the anxiety disorders, there are various types of anxiety disorders. So, you know, people can say, well, I'm suffering from anxiety, but there are different types of anxiety disorders out there. We've got social anxiety, where people are basically somewhat terrified of performing in public or doing things in a social environment for fear that they're being harshly judged or scrutinized by other people. So social anxiety can stop people from even going out, from socializing, from doing the things that most of us will take for granted, like going to the shops and engaging in church activities or various activities. And then we've got obsessive compulsive disorder. That's what OCD stands for. And this is when people really have very intrusive thoughts that make them feel compelled to do something. They become obsessed with doing something. For example, somebody could perhaps think, well, in order to ensure that I'm safe at night when I'm going to bed, I need to check about 5 times to make sure the lights turned off and make sure the chains on the door properly. Otherwise, something bad's going to happen. And then they've got these intrusive thoughts. They've got intrusive images of things that could go wrong. And that compels them to engage in certain behaviors. And then we've got phobias. People have different types of phobias, and it could be that something's happened in the past that's made them really, really afraid of something. So we've got people who are afraid of heights. We've got people who are afraid of spiders, for example. Those are, you know, people who are afraid of dogs, for example. People have phobias for various things, and that's a type of anxiety disorder. And then we've got panic attacks or agoraphobia. Panic attacks is when somebody panics out of nowhere. So normally what would happen is the body would react. Adrenaline will be produced in the body, and the body would react thinking that there's a threat about to happen. The heart might beat very fast. The person might become very sweaty, and because they've perceived that something bad is going to happen. And so a person would have panic attacks, would find it difficult to breathe, would hyperventilate, and all of that sort of thing. And agoraphobia is when a person feels that they're trapped in an environment, even when it doesn't necessarily feel claustrophobic. They feel that they've got no escape should something happen, and should they be a threat, they will not be able to escape from that environment. And then we've got health anxiety, and that is one that's probably quite common in this climate, where people just have a fear that they're going to contract a certain illness or a certain disease. And perhaps what they'll keep doing is they keep checking the internet, they keep reading up on things, they keep trying to diagnose themselves and scanning their bodies to check if there's anything wrong going on, to confirm their anxiety around the health problem that they think that they have. Also, we have generalized anxiety disorder, which is basically when a person just worries about everything. So we have sometimes people who refer to themselves as warriors, and they say, "Oh, I just worry. I just worry about everything." And these are the type of people who will, in every situation, will sort of catastrophize the situation and say, well, what if this happens? And then what if that happens? And the worry just keeps getting magnified in their minds. And then they start to possibly worry about the fact that they're worrying so much. So worry that just gets out of hand, out of control. And it's just generalized. It's no specific thing. It's not necessarily health. It's not necessarily social. It's just worrying about anything and everything. So when people have anxiety, anxiety could manifest itself in one of these disorders. So one person's anxiety might look very different from another person's anxiety disorder. So, you know, another common mental health problem that we see a lot is depression. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about depression. Depression is itself in one of these disorders. So one person's anxiety might look very different. Okay, can you hear me, people? Can everyone hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, I was hearing myself for a minute. That's why I stopped. Okay, so moving on to depression. Depression is another common mental health problem. I'm sure a lot of us have heard about depression. Depression really, generally, people tend to feel low. We all have low days. We all have days when we don't feel on top of the world and we just wish the day away. And that's okay. It happens to everyone from time to time. But there's a difference between that and this persistent feeling of, you know, feeling low, feeling depressed. And normally when it gets in the way of our day-to-day functioning, in other words, sometimes people who suffer depression are unable to get out of bed, are unable to go to work, are unable to do the things that they would normally be able to do. If that happens continuously for up to a period of 2 weeks, then it's time to see the GP. It's time to speak to somebody who is medically trained to assess and to determine what's going on there. So depression is not just about, well, I've got one low day and I'm feeling I'm feeling a bit under the weather today, but tomorrow I'm okay. It's when it's persistent for at least a period of 2 weeks or over an extended period of time. And that normally is known as unipolar depression, but we also have bipolar depression. And this is when a person has highs and lows. So when a person has what we call manic periods, periods where they are really, really hyperactive, periods where they're really, really outgoing, they're doing things out of character, really. And people might be wondering, what's wrong with this person? They're not normally this jolly. They could do erratic things like just go out, spend a lot of money, drink a lot, seemingly very happy. And that could go on for quite a few days, up to a period of a week. And then they have a dip. After that, they have a depressive period. And then they just feel low, they're not able to do anything. And so, for some people, it looks like mood swings. But, if somebody's out of character for an extended period of time and then they get low, or sometimes people might not really get low, so that there are variations of bipolar, but normally people will have a manic period, a period of high, erratic period, and then a low period. Let's pay close attention when we're seeing behaviors that are out of character, and let's try and start to find out a bit more about what's going on with this person, because it's likely that they're going through something a lot more serious than meets the eye, and that they might need some help, they might need some attention. Other sort of common mental health problems, we have eating disorders. We see people who have anorexia. They always think they're a lot bigger than they are. They always think they have a lot more weight on. Somehow they look in the mirror and it's like they think, well, they need to lose weight, even when they're so tiny. And you know, this is normally as a result of people wanting to be in control. For some reason, it might have been that something happened in their lives. It might have been that they were body shamed, and they might have been bullied, and they want to be in control. And we see that people with anorexia normally are people who, if they're not in control of other things in their lives, they want to be in control of their weight. It's the one thing that they can control. And so they try to control their weight by not eating enough or not eating a lot, because then that way they're going to be slim. And it doesn't matter how much you tell them, well, you know, you're okay, they still think they need to lose weight. And so they'll try and stop eating or not eat enough. We also have bulimia, which is another eating disorder where people are also trying to control how they look. So people are eating, but trying to purge out the food, trying to get rid of the food, trying to vomit the food or take laxatives so they can have diarrhea and get the food out. These eating disorders have a lot to do with wanting to be in control. We also have people who eat and eat excessively. And a lot of the time when we dig deeper, it's because something's gone wrong in their life, and the eating is a way of coping, or is a way of managing situations in their lives. So binge eating is another type of eating disorder, but eating disorders again are quite common, and not, you know, we see people with eating disorders normally have some form of depression, normally have some form of anxiety as well. And then we've got post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is when something eventful and negative has happened in a person's life, and that has a massive effect on the brain, so much so that the brain is unable to really process that information. And that post-trauma affects them for a long time. So they have flashbacks, they have nightmares, they're unable to sleep. So the experience keeps being played back in their minds over and over again, almost like they're back in time to when the event happened. And normally these people will feel like they're back in that environment. So if it was a road traffic accident, if it was a terrorist attack, if it was being out on the battlefield, we see a lot of soldiers, when they come back from war, they suffer post-traumatic stress disorder because they have the flashbacks and the nightmares from when they were out in the battlefield. And they can smell the smells of that time. They can hear certain sounds. It's almost like they're reliving the experience all over again. And normally people like this are very, very sort of aroused easily, in terms of they're always on the alert and always can be very jumpy or very, very scared, feel threatened all the time, or panic a lot because they think that danger is happening, is around the corner, and what they went through is happening all over again. Those mental health problems, these mental health problems are quite common. We see them a lot, and it's not because somebody has done something wrong. Like I said, we have a brain just like we have the rest of our bodies, and just because we can't see the brain doesn't mean it's not there. Indeed, it's quite a powerhouse to our bodies as humans. It determines a lot of what goes on. It determines a lot of the chemical reactions that take place. And so it's really important to recognize the fact that, you know, these mental health problems exist. These mental health problems need attention, just like when we have a fracture, for example, we need to get the doctors, we need to see a doctor, perhaps we need to have an operation, perhaps we need to have a cast. We need to get our mental health issues looked into, because they don't just go away. If we have a fracture, if we have a broken arm or a broken leg, it doesn't just go away. It needs medical attention. In the same way, our mental health issues need attention as well, from people who are trained. And yes, you know, a lot of things help. like prayer and talking to other people, but sometimes we do need to get professional help. We also have other complex problems. We have things like psychosis, which basically this is when somebody is really out of touch with reality. A lot of the time they will hear voices like schizophrenia. They'll hear voices, they'll hallucinate, they'll see things that are not there, hear voices outside of their bodies. Sometimes voices telling them to do things, sometimes voices telling them how great they are and how magnificent and how they can do all these wonderful things. It's just simply out of touch with actually what's happening in reality. And normally the problem with some of these issues is that the brain is overwhelmed with stress. And sometimes that stress has happened over an extended period of time. And so people are just unable to cope. And when the brain just too much, that's manifested in psychotic type disorders. We also have Alzheimer's, which are Alzheimer's, that various types of Alzheimer's diseases. One of them is dementia. And basically in this cluster of diseases or disorders is that the brain degenerates. There's a degeneration of the brain cells. And so the brain over time is not able to function effectively. And then that does have a knock-on effect on our physical well-being and on other parts of our bodies as well. So those are some of the common mental health problems that people experience. I'm just gonna pause here for a little bit. I'm conscious of the fact that I've just, provided so much information and that people might have comments, people might have questions. So I'm just going to pause briefly and ask if there are any questions and any comments before I continue.
Yeah, if there's any questions, just unmute yourself and ask the questions directly to Sister Alison, please.
So Dr. Awuku. Hello.
Hi, I can hear you, Jason.
Right, so I'm Jason. So I have a question while we're waiting for the other members to submit theirs. Are there any emergency helplines available for someone who might be struggling with suicidal thoughts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Emergency helplines, the Samaritans is a good one. If I'm correct, I think the number is 116 123. But if you Google up the Samaritan, it's a service that's open all year round, 24 hours a day and 365 days or 66 days a year. They are trained listeners that are always online. And if somebody feels that, they're going through a very, very stressful period and they are quite suicidal, the Samaritans are a very good contact to get in touch with. They are excellent. They'll talk you through what you're experiencing, what you're going through, whilst respecting your autonomy. So contact the Samaritans. You can also contact 111 or 999. Normally somebody will be on the other side, especially if you say, well, I'm really feeling like I don't want to be around anymore. I'm really having suicidal thoughts. They will normally, if you ring 999, they'll normally, or 111, they'll refer you to the appropriate person. So there's a lot of help out there. Also, obviously, your GP is a go-to person. GPs are trained to assess people and then refer them onto the right services or to the right people. So I'll just say there's a lot of help out there. The Samaritans are out there. 999, the NHS is out there. Mental health is a big focus within the NHS at the moment. And, there are a lot of other charities that are out there. We've got Mind and so many other charities that are out there that will be able to help people. So you don't have to suffer alone, or you don't have to suffer in silence.
All right, so while we're still waiting for more questions, I have a follow-up question to my previous question. And we do know that during the the lockdown, the NHS is actually rolling back or scaling down on a lot of the services that they're offering. Now, if it is that someone would like to access therapy because of loss of a loved one or because of loss of a job or loneliness, what would the wait times be like for someone to access a therapist for talk therapy?
Okay. I don't personally work for the NHS. I work as a private psychotherapist. So I can't speak on the waiting times for the NHS, but I am aware that the NHS has a system whereby they prioritize mental health problems in terms of mild, moderate, and severe. And so they would normally do an assessment pretty much straight away and determine the level of severity, and then they will communicate with the person approximately how long it might take. But then that, depending on how severe the problem is, it could be pretty soon. It could be, even if, within the community, that crisis teams that are, if somebody is on the edge, is on the verge of doing something that's going to be of serious harm to themselves or other people around them, crisis would normally step in. So, we've got a wealth of experience and of help privately and also within the NHS. But if anybody is experiencing problems, make that call. You will speak to somebody, and even if they're not able to help you straight away, they will be able to give you an indication of how long it might take, depending on obviously the severity of the problem.
Okay.
Could I just say, Jason, it's Pat. I've had recent experience because I have a friend who was suffering with suicidal ideation. So we had to get her to the hospital. We rang 111. They were sending an ambulance, but what they said is if you can get them to the hospital, then that would be the best thing. So we attended the hospital. Because of what's going on with COVID-19, it was basically empty. So we were able to get straight to the desk, be seen within about 20 minutes. And what they did was they took my friend off to one room, and then they brought me in as her support. And then they advised us to have all the things that Alison's just said, but as well as, I think within 10 days, she was able to be seen by video call by somebody from the crisis team and other people, and that's ongoing now. The difficulty was getting through to her GP because her GP wasn't seeing anyone. However, after a little bit of pushing by another friend who's a nurse, we were able to get a GP appointment. So if anybody is suffering, just need to be persistent. Don't be afraid of going to A&E, because you will get seen quickly and then they'll put things into place.
Okay, thank you.
Very good shout. Was that Pat?
Yes, it was.
I think that was Pat. Yeah, good shout, because whilst we've had COVID, the hospitals have not been as busy. So people are getting seen a lot quicker when they turn up at A&E. I don't know how long that's going to be the case for, because a lot of people are catching up on the fact that, yes, they can just go into A&E. But certainly that's a very good shout. Go to your local A&E if you're able to, or if you can find somebody to take you there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I believe those are the questions for now.
Okay, we'll have an opportunity to have further discussions and ask more questions towards the end. So I'm just going to move on to one of the sort of common mental health problems that we looked at, and that's anxiety. And here I'm just asking the question, is it possible in the church? Is it possible in the church, anxiety? I would say if 1 in 4 people around the world are suffering from a common mental health problem at any point in time, then I'd say that, yes, it is possible in the church. Anxiety is a problem that affects a lot of people, simply because as human beings, we are faced with uncertainty. We are faced with what we would deem or perceive as certain threats. And so we tend to suffer anxiety. Although we know from the Bible that, there's an admonishment not to be anxious or not to be afraid. And that's because I suppose God knows that as human beings, we would be anxious, we would suffer anxiety. So yes, it is absolutely possible in the church. So let's have a look then at what happens really when somebody feels anxious, what's going on, or potentially what's going on. This is the case a lot of the time, perhaps not all of the time, because in some anxiety disorders, you don't always get a thought first. Sometimes, as the case with panic, for example, you would normally get your body reacting first. You would normally get a physiological reaction before you can even really focus on the thought. So, but a lot of the time with anxiety, there's a thought process that's going on. And normally that's a negative thought process. So the thought process is probably something along the lines of, there's danger around the corner, something bad is going to happen, and I'm not going to be able to cope with it. So our perception, our interpretation of the event is that our ability to cope is a lot less than the threat that's presenting itself. And so we're thinking, nah, this is way beyond my ability to cope. Something bad's going to happen to me. I'm going to get attacked. Something's going to happen. I'm going to die. I'm going to fall very ill. And then with that thought comes a feeling, comes an emotion, such as, well, I'm tense. I can't really breathe properly. I feel a tightness in my chest. I'm shaky. I feel lightheaded. I'm sweaty. And that's because there's a chemical reaction going on. That's because our brains have told us you're not able to cope in this situation, and messages are being sent to parts of the brain to produce adrenaline, and adrenaline then prepares us to fight back in that situation or to run away from the situation, to preserve ourselves, to protect ourselves. And so then what happens then is the behavior that says, well, okay, because I think that there's a threat around the corner, because I think that my security or sense of security is being compromised, I'm just not going to go out. I'm going to make excuses, or I'm just going to leave early because I don't think I'm going to be able to cope with this situation. And so when we do that, when we respond with that sort of behavior, it might feel safe in that moment in time. It might feel like, yes, I'm doing the right thing to help myself, to protect myself. But actually, what that behavior, if we carry on with that behavior, is what we will do is we'll reinforce the thoughts that there's a threatening situation and that we will not be able to cope. And when we reinforce that thought, it's then followed by the emotions, feeling anxious, feeling scared. And then the behavior of isolating ourselves or making excuses, or trying not to engage in certain situations, or trying not to go out, for example, because we think that somebody is going to judge us harshly, somebody is going to scrutinize us. That just carries on and becomes a vicious cycle. And we can start to see how anxiety just magnifies and really becomes a problem. And in some cases, like I said, some people will lock themselves in their houses and not really want to go out because they think, well, this is too threatening. And the more we do that, the more we reinforce the thought that there's danger out there and we mustn't go out. So another common problem that we looked at was depression. And depression, like we said, is when somebody feels really low, somebody feels really down for an extended period of time, and it starts to get in the way of their day-to-day living. And so what we see with depression is we see somebody who feels low. We see somebody who maybe seems moody, maybe doesn't want to socialize or doesn't really want to talk to a lot of people. And really, what we see is just the tip of the iceberg. That's why I've got the icebergs there. Because really, what they're feeling is possibly a lot of other emotions. They're probably feeling a lot of anger. Maybe something's happened and that they've not addressed or processed, and they're feeling quite angry. Or it might be that they're feeling guilty about something which may or may not be their fault. It might be that there's a feeling of emptiness. Maybe we've lost a job or a relationship or a loved one and we feel empty. Or it might just be even anxiety, or we might feel helpless or hopeless. Depression is about feeling hopeless, feeling like everything is doom and gloom and there's no way out of the situation. There's no way that we can regain hope again in that situation. And if that carries on over a period of time, if we don't pay attention to these emotions that sit underneath the depression over a period of time, it becomes more and more of a problem. So I know that a lot of people are very good at brushing aside certain emotions and not wanting to talk about it because it's just not really the comfortable thing to do. But I would urge people, if something is going wrong, our emotions are normal. Just like we have good emotions or more welcomed emotions, we also have challenging emotions. They're part of our makeup. Our emotions indicate to us, tell us that there's something that needs our attention. There's something that we need to perhaps process. There's something that we need to attend to. And so emotions come and go, just like the weather comes and goes. We have different weather. We have sunshine, we have snow, we have rainfall. They change all the time. The emotions per se are not a problem. What might be a problem is the way that we handle the emotions, is the way that we react as a consequence of the emotions that we experience. So it's important to take time out to address the emotions that we feel, the emotions that we come across. And let's remember that when we see somebody who is depressed, what we see is the tip of the iceberg. And it's normally worth trying to find out a bit more as to why, they look maybe so dull or so low or not wanting to socialize or communicate with us. And if we took the time perhaps to find out a bit more, then perhaps we could start to help them to get to the bottom of some of the emotions that they're experiencing and really help them to get some help. So a bit like anxiety, what might the cycle of depression look like in practice? So we have the thoughts, we have the negative thoughts, which when somebody is depressed, the thoughts are quite negative. The thoughts are quite skewed towards the negative. A person is gloomy. Generally, the person is self-critical. They will think, well, perhaps I've messed everything up. There's no point. What's the point of life? Their perception of themselves, their perception of the world and people, other people, their perception of the future is quite negative. The thinking is distorted. They will filter out all of the potentially positive things or positive thoughts and really only focus on the negatives. So the thought process becomes very negative. The feelings as a result, the emotions would be negative as well. It could be anger. It could be just feeling not motivated. All sorts of negative emotions could come into the frame. And the consequence of that in terms of behavior is that they'll want to stay at home. Maybe they don't want to socialize with other people. They want to cut themselves off from other people. And so when they do that in their own isolation, that just gives them more of an opportunity to reinforce the negative thought that the world really is horrible, the future, there really is no point, and other people are not so great. And then it makes them feel bad. It makes them feel low. It makes them lack motivation, not interested in anything. And so the behavior follows as well. So that's how the cycle can go on. So we can see how something that would start off as just a normal thing that can get a person down can end up really in clinical depression, where somebody needs help, where somebody then starts to self-harm and starts to think, well, I don't want to be around anymore. I just want to take my own life. So let's look at it then in terms of what potentially can happen in church. So this is just an example. This isn't something that's happened in Manchester, hopefully. It's just an example of how this cycle can play out. So somebody has said to a fellow Christian that, look, what's happening with you these days? you've backslidden. You're not really a good example for the other people who are new to the church. And so if that person has had things going on in their lives that have been challenging, it might, at this point, when they're told, well, you're backsliding, what's going on, very disappointed, then the thought process could be, oh my goodness me, I'm so full of sin. I'm letting God down. I'm letting everyone down. But nobody understands what I've been through. Nobody's really going to understand that, I'm going through all of this stuff. And actually, I think I've brought this upon myself, because remember, when people are depressed, they're quite self-critical. So they will blame themselves. They'll be ashamed of themselves. They'll carry guilt that perhaps sometimes they don't need to carry. And so with all of those thought processes going on, the feelings that follow is possibly guilt, possibly shame, possibly depression, possibly sadness, possibly anger, possibly frustration. All of these feelings can manifest themselves in this person. Remember, this is a member of the church, possibly a long-standing member of the church. And then they start thinking, well, I can't, I'm so terrible, and I'm feeling so guilty. I'm feeling so low. I'm feeling so bad, and nobody understands. I'm just going to stay at home. I'm just going to isolate myself, and I'm not going to seek help. I'm not going to get professional help, because what does that really say about me? It means that, like, I don't really have faith. It means that, well, what are other Christians who are new to the faith or to the church going to think about me? So then they isolate themselves. They don't seek help. They don't want to talk to anybody. Perhaps maybe they don't trust people around them to talk to them. And so then in that self-isolation, the thoughts of, oh my goodness, I'm so guilty, I'm so bad, I've backslidden, I've sinned against God, I've let everyone down. That's a reinforcement of the thought that then goes to create more depressive feelings that lead to the isolation. So very easily, this cycle of anxiety, depression can very easily play itself out amongst us in the church. And so it's very, very important that we pay attention to how we feel, pay attention to what we're thinking, pay attention to what we're going through, and accept the fact that, in life, we all have struggles. We all have times when we need each other. We need each other's help, and try and get that help. So just looking at some of the common consequences of poor mental health, we have sleep disorder. A lot of people who suffer anxiety, depression find it very difficult to have a good night's sleep, probably because there's so much going on in their minds, probably because their sleeping patterns are distorted and they're not able to get the right amount of sleep when they're supposed to be sleeping. And so when sleep is affected, it affects every other thing. You're not able to concentrate, you don't feel motivated, you feel tired all the time, which then reinforces the poor mental health. Low self-esteem, like I said before, a lot of people, as a consequence of poor mental health, will suffer low self-esteem. And because of low self-esteem, will suffer poor mental health. So it's, they feed into each other. And then we've got loneliness as well. And again, we have people who feel lonely because they have mental health issues, and then they feel that their mental health has been damaged because they're lonely, and it's a cycle that can repeat itself. So we start to get a picture into how certain things have a knock-on effect on each other. It's almost like dominoes. One thing affects the next and affects the next. What's important is that we get to find out, become aware enough to understand what the triggers are, what things trigger us to feel very anxious, us to feel very low, what emotions we are experiencing. Try not to judge our emotions or judge other people, but take time to understand them and address them and talk about them if we need to. Otherwise, it's just one thing's just going to affect the other thing and the other thing. So those are some of the consequences of poor mental health. But just to take a closer look at loneliness, because loneliness is something that we see a lot of. In the pandemic, we've had one lockdown, we're in the middle of another lockdown, and a lot of people feel lonely. And loneliness, it's not just about having people around you that makes you feel like, well, you know, I'm not lonely, I'm okay. Sometimes in a church full of people, or in a house full of people, or in a community full of people, we can still feel lonely. And loneliness can happen when we're starting off a new venture, or we're moving into another country, when we have a bereavement, or when we've suffered loss of any type, a job, a home, or when we've lost our social network, when we've lost the sort of lifestyle that we've been accustomed to, and that we're having to make adjustments. Loneliness also happens at certain times of the year that brings back certain memories for certain people. Like during Christmas time, people tend to feel quite lonely. So those are some of the causes of loneliness, but it's important to say, to remember that loneliness is not just the absence of people. Loneliness is when somebody doesn't feel understood, somebody doesn't feel heard, somebody doesn't feel like they belong within a group or within a community. That makes them feel very lonely, even when they're surrounded by people. It's very possible for people to feel quite lonely. Okay, this is my second pause. Before I go on to practical ways of helping ourselves and helping each other, I'm just gonna pause here, Jason, and check in to see if there are any questions, any comments.
Yes. First question is from Sister Pat Lewis, and this one is asking, are there some treatments for mental health issues that Christians should avoid?
Okay. I would say that if you have mental health issues, the first thing you should do is contact your GP. I can only speak for what I know works. As a Christian, personally, I wouldn't advise hypnotherapy, for example. Medication, some people are really anti-medication, but medication can be useful in some cases because some people need their brain chemicals to be balanced. So sometimes when people have severe mental health problems, in order to regulate them, they need medication. I would like to answer that question by saying that there are some treatments that Christians should seek more than others. And I would say, if you're looking for therapy, if you're looking for psychotherapy, you're looking for counseling, find a Christian counselor, somebody who can relate with your faith and to whom you can speak freely about your faith and your beliefs. Because whilst every therapist can be very helpful, there are certain things within the Christian faith that are really best understood by Christian therapists or Christian counselors. So find somebody who is a Christian therapist, Christian counselor. You can look up Christian counselors. They've got the Association of Christian Counselors. You can have a look there and see if you can find a Christian counselor, or ask within the church network to see if you can get a Christian counselor. But if you're wanting to get treatment, find out what the treatment is offering. Ask about the treatment you're about to get. If you're not comfortable, get somebody else who can offer possibly a treatment that you're more comfortable with. There are so many different types of treatments that out there, and it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly who is going to offer what and whether or not it's acceptable. But you will be able to get a sense, a feel for whether somebody is going to really help you or not help you. Again, on medication, because I know that a lot of people are anti-medication, talk to your psychiatrist about it or your GP about it if you're not comfortable. But I would say therapy talking therapy is very, very good treatment or very good help for Christians. It's very good to talk about the challenges you have, the problems that you have, because in talking, you get to learn about the resources that you have within yourself that can help you cope, and you get to release the pressure on your mind, the pressure on your brain, and it helps you to just release the stress that you're experiencing. So are there some treatments that Christians should avoid? Possibly, yes. I would say hypnotherapy, it will just make you unconscious and discourage you from reasoning. And that's why I would be skeptical about to go with hypnotherapy. But a lot of the other talking therapies should be quite useful. I hope that's giving you some guide. It's not a very yes or no straightforward question.
I have a personal follow-up question. So as Seventh-day Adventists, we like to talk about natural remedies as well as God's pharmacy. So I would like to know, are there any natural remedies that have been found to be useful for depression, anxiety, and psychotic illnesses?
Okay. Not so much psychotic illnesses. When somebody gets psychotic, then they really need medical attention. They need a psychiatrist. They need to see a psychiatrist because its brain chemicals are so imbalanced that they need that help. Natural remedies. If you've heard of New Start, that's the thing. Everything that's good for your physical well-being is good for your mental well-being. So nutrition, make sure you get your nutrition right, eat the right foods, stay away from foods that are very high in fats and carbohydrates, and get a lot of proteins, vegetables, all that sort of stuff. That's very good. Exercise is fantastic. Exercise helps you to produce endorphins, which are positive hormones that make you feel happy and that counteract depression. So exercise is very good. Drinking a lot of water, that's very good. Sunshine, fantastic. Temperament, trusting God, all of that stuff, all of the stuff that you would do in your physical well-being is also very beneficial for your mental health being, well-being. So pay attention to what you're taking in mentally and pay attention to what you're eating and drinking physically as well.
Okay, so we do know that following the New Start 8 laws of health would help to prevent us from developing mental health challenges. However, what about in the acute setting where a person is having, for example, a panic attack and they just need something to calm them down? Is there anything such as ginger or garlic or any other herbs that you would recommend, or breathing exercises that would help in that moment?
Okay. I am not a nutritionist, so I don't know in terms of ingesting ginger, garlic. I don't know what effects that has. Definitely there are things like breathing exercises that you can do. If you're having a panic attack, yes, I would say deep breaths. You can breathe in counting to 4 very slowly, holding it, counting to 4, and breathing out, counting to 4. What that does is it regulates the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your body and helps your body to calm down. So that will help. Trying to get enough sleep. So having a consistent sleep pattern, going to bed at a particular time, waking up at a particular time, being consistent around that, having 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night if you can, and being consistent, making sure that your environment, so it's very important what we mentally take in. So the things that we watch, the things that we read, the conversations that we have, what we're telling ourselves is very important. Our self-talk is very important. Those things will help. Breathing, exercising, all of those natural things will help. In terms of taking in ginger, taking in garlic, I have to say that's not my area of expertise. It's not something I've researched on or that I know about, but I know that having a healthy diet and drinking a lot of water is good for you. If you're having excessive panic attacks, then you probably need to see a therapist, because it's possible that there's specific things that you will need to go through in therapy to help. So speak to a therapist if it's a persistent problem.
Okay, and we have a few more questions. We'll keep them short. So of late, there have been lots of advice about taking care of our mental health from the mainstream media. Now, one of those things they are recommending is meditation. Now, are there any advice that is there any advice that you would give against meditation?
Meditation is very good, depending on what you're meditating on. Naturally, as Christians, I would say that, go to the Word of God, search up scriptures that, especially the promises in the Bible, and meditate on those scriptures, meditate on the Word of God. That's very soothing, that's very helpful. Obviously, if you're meditating on things that are not aligned to your faith, then it could cause a lot more harm, because it could end up confusing you rather than helping you. So yes, meditation is good, meditation is positive, but it's important that we pay attention to what we are meditating on.
So of late, there have been lots of people who are into scented candles at the end of a stressful day. Does aromatherapy work?
Aromatherapy, there's certain fragrances, or there are certain scents that help, like lavender, that help to soothe. So it does work for some people. Massaging works for some people. Natural remedies that just use natural products can be soothing for people and can work for some people. It's very difficult to provide a blanket response to what's going to help a person's mental health. What happens is that normally people will need to get assessed and will need to have an understanding of what actually is going on. Because whilst we can say certain therapies or certain things work for some people, it might not work for other people. It might trigger certain negative things for other people. So it's very important that we're careful not to provide blanket prescriptions or blanket therapies for people, because we just don't know exactly what they're going through. The whole process of therapy includes quite a detailed assessment of who the person is, what they're going through, what their triggers are, how they cope, what their life experiences are, and start to work with those and understand how all of those things, all of those factors impact on them in the here and now. So certain things will work for certain people. Aromatherapy will work for some people. Meditation will work for some people, but might not work for other people, because it might trigger certain memories or certain things for them, and they may have to go through a certain protocol within therapeutic treatment to help them. So if you hear about something where somebody says, well, this is good, this works, that works, yes, you can take it on board, but just bear in mind that each one of us is unique. The reason why people may have mental health issues is because they've gone through different life experiences and they're responding to those experiences differently. So people might have resilience more than other people. People might respond to one scent or one type of aromatherapy more than another person. It might depend on the life experiences that they've had. So that's a long answer to your brief question, Jason.
All right. Would you be able to take one more question during this pause?
Yeah, sure.
So you touched on mental health in the church. Now, what practical advice would you give specifically to church leaders in order for them to be able to address the mental health challenges of their congregation appropriately.
Okay. Hopefully we'll cover more of that in the slides that are to come. But in terms of church leaders, I would just say try not to judge. Try not to judge anybody who presents with any challenges, any psychological, emotional, or mental challenges. Sometimes it's quite tempting for us to want to answer why certain things are happening, or we want to reason things out. We want to try and give certain things a meaning. And so, we draw conclusions very quickly. I would say try not to judge, try to listen. Remember that, like we saw in the iceberg, the depression iceberg, what we see is just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath might be so much else that might be going on for that person. So encourage as church leaders, encourage an atmosphere of trust where people can be vulnerable, where people can open up and talk about their experiences without fear of being judged. Empathize with your members.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Okay, I'm just going to carry on. So in the slides that I'm going to sort of focus on, we've covered some of the things that I've just talked about, but I'll just carry on. So what can one do to help themselves? What are some of the practical self-help things that we can do? Good sleep, I've talked about it. Consistent sleep times, at least 7 to 8 hours a night of sleep. I know that sometimes as we get older, we don't tend to sleep as much, but it's important that we have a routine, a sleep routine that's consistent. It's important that we allow ourselves, our brains, time to shut down, time to unwind before we sleep. So in other words, we are not on gadgets just before we sleep, because our brains will carry on being active and not allow us to get the level of rest that we need to if we're on gadgets, or our brains are very active just before we go to sleep. So good sleep is important. Exercise is important. We don't have to be a gym member. We don't have to, do weights or go on the treadmill. We can just go walking every day, about, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour of walking every day is good exercise. It makes a world of a difference. So exercise is important. I've talked about this: eating well, drinking enough water, also talking to somebody that you can trust or help, or that can help. If you can't find anybody that you can trust, because sometimes we just need to be able to talk and for somebody to listen without, telling us, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. If you can't, get help from a therapist, or get help from a professional. Some people have concerns about money. There are a lot of charities out there that do provide therapeutic services. See if you can get to some help. Talk to someone who can talk to someone who can talk to someone, and get the help whilst you can, because otherwise the problem just festers, gets worse and worse, and becomes a much bigger problem. People find themselves in a crisis situation when they could have just really eased the burden by just talking to somebody about it. Another thing is, please try not to compare yourself to other people. Try not to compare yourself to other people. We're all unique. We all have special gifts, special talents. We are all very special. And there's nobody who has everything and who is the envy of everybody else. So let's be grateful for who we are, what we have, and let's celebrate what we have, rather than try to compare ourselves with others all the time. Because that just leads to anxiety, that just leads to jealousy, that could lead to depression. It just puts so much pressure on us that we don't need. Get involved with helping others. Acts of kindness. I think yesterday was World Kindness Day. I wonder how many of us engaged in acts of kindness. Use your hobbies where possible. acts of kindness make us feel good about ourselves. It gives us a sense of achievement. And when we have a sense of achievement, we're motivated to want to do even more. And when we do even more, then we are motivated to feel good about ourselves, to think positive about ourselves, and to do even more. So engage in acts of kindness, make a difference, feel like you're making a difference to somebody in somebody else's life, because that way you're also making a positive difference in your life. And also limit the use of social media, or when you use social media, make sure that you're doing that in a constructive manner. Social media is geared towards influencing people, towards selling either ourselves or other people or goods to the rest of the world. So let's limit, or where we do use social media, let's make sure that we're using it in a constructive way, because that could just have a knock-on effect on how we see ourselves, how we perceive other people. And a lot of the time, these perceptions are incorrect and may lead us to feeling lonely, feeling anxious, feeling like a failure, feeling like we're the only one who is not progressing because we don't have this and we don't have that other people might seem to have. So those are practical ways we can help ourselves. That's not exhaustive. There's so many other ways. I'm sure, people can think of so many other ways, which hopefully you can share after this presentation. Another way to help ourselves, especially when we have anxiety, is to just take time and examine our worry. What are we worried about? I mean, these days we're so busy, coming and going, toing and froing, so many things, so many Zoom activities, for example, so many programs. And, our minds are in constant pressure, working, being overworked all the time. And so that, it doesn't leave us with a lot of time to reflect, and we can tend to worry about a lot of things. But when we get worried, it's important that we engage in what's going on in that process of worry. I've got something here that we use quite a lot in therapy for people who worry excessively, and it's called the worry tree. And it's basically like a process map to help you process your worry. And basically it's just, first of all, noticing what is it that I'm worried about. Some people are just anxious constantly, and it can be very difficult to pinpoint exactly what it is that's causing the anxiety. So it's important to pause and think, what's causing this worry? What's triggered it? What's caused it? What am I worrying about? And sometimes we worry about things that are non-existent. We worry about hypothetical things. We just in case, what if this happens? Or what if that happens? What am I going to do? But it hasn't happened. It's not there yet. So if it's a hypothetical worry, do we really want to spend our lives and our time worrying about something that doesn't yet exist? Because chances are, when the thing happens, if it's going to happen, is that we will worry about it some more then. So why not just wait? If it does happen, then we worry about it then. 80% of the things, the hypothetical worries that we have, don't actually come to pass. So if the worry is not a current problem, it's not a current situation, then it's best to try and shift our focus of attention to something else and think about something else. If the worry is a current problem, for instance, I have a test, I have an exam coming up on Tuesday. I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to do well in the exam. It's something that's happening. It's a current issue. It's an issue that's happening in your life at that time. So is it a current problem? Yes, it's a current problem. What are you going to do about it? When are you going to do something about it? And how are you going to go about doing that? If you can do something about it now, go ahead, do it. Once you've done it, you've done all you can. You can let the worry go and focus your attention on something else. If you can't do something about it now, when are you going to be able to do something about it? Is it later on? Okay, when later on? Schedule it in. Once you've done that, there's nothing else you can do. Sometimes we worry too much because we want to be in control. But can we really be in control of everything? do we really know what's going to happen tomorrow? We can plan, but we can't necessarily be in control. So it's important to process what's going on, to channel our thoughts, to understand what the worry is about, to ask ourselves, is it a current problem or is it hypothetical? If it's current, what are we going to do about it? Do what we can and let it go. I'm sure there's so many other things that we can think about. And that's why, you know, in Matthew 6, the Bible says that, why are you worried about tomorrow? Sufficient for today are the things, are its problems, are the things that we can think about and do something. The only thing that we have control over is our present time. We can't do anything about the past because it's happened, and we can't go back to the past and change it. We can't change the future because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, although we can plan for it. But in terms of what can we do, only the present, only now do we have the ability to do something about. So, you know, think about what you can do in the here and now. Once you've done what you can about your current worry, then it's time to focus on what's happening today. What are you having for dinner? And, you know, have you done your devotion? Just those practical things that you can do for the day. How do we support other people who are suffering mental health problems? Jason asked the question, how can we support each other? How can leaders support the congregation? And or how can communities or congregations support each other? I've mentioned this, listening. Listening is very powerful, listening attentively and without judgment. Sometimes we have all the answers even before the other person has finished speaking. Bet this, bet that, or have you tried this? Have you tried? Oh, I would have done it this way. I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have thought so. Sometimes when somebody is going through mental health issues and they're quite vulnerable, they don't need that. They just need us to listen. Listen attentively. Be empathic. Put yourself in the other person's shoe. Imagine yourself in that situation. Don't imagine yourself as yourself in that situation, but imagine yourself being that other person and what they might be going through. Show empathy. Perhaps say to them, well, you know, I can appreciate this is difficult for you. I can understand how you might be feeling right now. And just, you know, show that you're there to listen attentively and you're not going to judge them in any way. Remember that sometimes, like I've said a couple of times already, what we see is only the tip of an iceberg. We don't know the full story. And in order to sort of engage, get that person engaged so that we can truly help them, we need to find out, we need to try and understand more of what's going on beneath the surface. And so if we hold that at the back of our minds, we will be able to listen to them attentively, we will be able to be patient with them, and we will be able to move with them at their pace. It's important that if somebody is going through challenges and they ask for something to be confidential, that we respect that and maintain that confidentiality. Having said that, there are times when we can't always maintain confidentiality. If somebody, for example, says, I've got a rope in the back of my car, I'm driving to the river and I'm going to hang myself, you can't maintain that confidentiality. So if somebody comes to say, well, I want to talk to you, I'm talking to you in confidence, it's important that we are clear that there might be something, if there's something you tell me that cannot maintain confidentiality, this is what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to either ring the GP, I'm going to ring 111 or 999, I'm going to call somebody so that together we can help you. If it's not something that poses a serious threat to that person or the people around them, or if it's not a safeguarding issue, then we must maintain confidentiality. Because if we've assured a person that I'll keep it confidential apart from these circumstances, then it's important to maintain that. And if you're going to break that confidentiality, then speak to the person about it and say, you know, you told me this, I think that it's worth telling the pastor. What do you think? And have a discussion, have a collaboration around the subject so that the person still feels held, like you're helping them. Otherwise, trust completely goes. And when trust goes, that could be more detrimental to the person's mental health. And also, of course, we can offer practical and spiritual support. We can offer practical support to people who are very, very depressed, people who cannot get out of their house or find it very difficult to function normally. We can do their shopping. We can go round and help them, maybe tidy up the house, do some housework for them, and we can pray for them and we can pray with them. So those are just some of the practical things that we can do to support others who are suffering. We might not be suffering, but I almost guarantee you there will be somebody around you, there will be somebody that you've known or close to you that will suffer a mental health problem. So just a few things to reflect on from the Word of God. The Word of God is always the go-to place as Christians, and it's full of promises for those who suffer mental health issues, or indeed for all of us. We have a few promises in the Bible. I've just picked out 3 here, but I'm sure you can think of many, many more. We've got Matthew 11:28-30 that says, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." That's a beautiful, beautiful promise. And Philippians 4:6-7 says that, "Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, that which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." Come unto me if you are anxious. Pray to me, call upon me, but sometimes call upon me. And in answering us, God can actually point us to people who can actually work with him to help us in our mental and psychological distress. And also we have 2 Timothy chapter 1:7, which is a beautiful, beautiful scripture. It says that God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So, it's been fantastic. There's a lot more we can say about mental health, but I'm just going to end it here. And hopefully that's given all of us this afternoon something to contemplate, something to reflect on, and, to start thinking of how we can help ourselves and help the people around us. So thank you so much for your time, for listening, for your attention. And I will open up to any more comments, contributions, and questions. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you so much. Now, since this is a church-based program that we're doing this evening, I would like to go back to the role of the church leaders. Now, do you think the church leaders should form a dedicated mental health team, one which would be charged with the task of trying to identify individuals who are at risk of developing mental health problems within the church? Individuals such as students living away from home, elderly people who are lonely, individuals who have been recently bereaved, or someone who is already known to have mental health challenges. Do you think we should form a dedicated team to address those individuals?
Absolutely. I think that, Jason, that's a fantastic question. I think that we all have the answers on our lips to that question. I think that indeed, within the church community, within the conferences, I'd like to say that there's a concerted effort by the health ministry teams, both in the conferences, in the mission to raise awareness of mental health. And, when we work together as a community, it's good for our mental health. So using the resources that we already have, the structure that we already have, being our health teams, ministries, within the ministries, I know that there are a lot of activities. There's various ministries, men's ministries, women's ministries, and we can use all of that to come together and really focus, really laser focus on what are some of the pertinent mental health issues that people are experiencing. I think it's a good idea to have champions. It's a good idea to have champions within church communities, within conferences. There are certain people who are professionals in the field as well. You know, we should make use of the professionals, the therapists, the counselors. Somebody's just mentioned about mental health first aid. There are a lot of people who have done the training on mental health first aid and mental health first aiders within the church. And so, Jason, I think that you've hit the nail on the head. If it's you who is asking the question, or whoever has asked the question, I think that we can have champions. We can have mental health champions, people who have done some sort of studies, people who are qualified, people who are professionals in the field, and just have like a support network where people can go to and talk confidentially about their mental health challenges. So absolutely, yes. That's the long answer to your short question again. I think absolutely it's much needed. I think it will be very beneficial.
Okay, and I have a few more questions that have been submitted. However, I do believe you might have already addressed them, but just for the sake of reassuring the persons who have submitted these questions. Now, for an individual who have recently been divorced and is now in denial about the end of their marriage, what would you say to such a person in order to help them to move on? Or
Okay.
should they have hope that the marriage will be reconciled in the future?
Okay. There we're moving into the area of couples marriage counseling, couples therapy. It's very difficult to provide a general response to that question. I do couples counseling, and I know that when people come to me with a question like that, I go through an assessment process because I want to understand what's happened. I want to understand if there's abuse, there's been abuse in that marriage. Is it a marriage that risks the life of one of the spouses? Or is it a marriage that can be worked through? Is it a marriage where both people are willing to work through? If you're asking about what are some of the mental health issues that such people could experience, yeah, we can talk about those. And I think we have a very good indication of what those are. But it's very difficult to say, yeah, come and let's do work on the marriage, or without actually knowing, understanding what's led that couple to that place of being on the verge of a divorce, what actually is going on. That assessment is key. That assessment is very important in order to be able to answer that question. So in other words, look for a marriage counselor, contact somebody who can do couples therapy. Normally, a good counselor should be able to offer you consultation, which should hopefully be free of charge. And in that time, you can give them a brief overview of what the issues are, and they'll be able to tell you, okay, this is something that's suitable for therapy, or no, because there's abuse and your safety is compromised, there's a serious risk of harm to yourself or somebody else. We can't work on it now. Or if there's substance abuse by one party, for example, drug addiction, drink addiction, that sort of thing, it might be a bit tricky to just go ahead and try to save that marriage at that time, because it might be that one party will have to work on themselves, may have to work on an addiction, may have to work on anger, or may have to work on other issues that they are experiencing before they can go ahead to actually actively work on the marriage.
Okay, so I've seen the scriptures that you've referred to that would help us to address some of our mental health challenges. Now, are there any books or specific passages within Spirit of Prophecy that would be helpful to someone who is either experiencing a mental health challenge or is preparing to make an intervention with someone who is experiencing a mental health challenge?
Wow, that's a tough question, because again, this is becoming like a record. Again, without knowing what the challenge is very difficult to recommend books or specific books. I would say that all of the promises in the Bible will help. How does that sound? Can we settle for that? All of the promises in the Bible. Ellen White, Spirit of Prophecy, I think she's got a book on character, conduct, something along those lines. That's good, but that might be quite heavy going. We have to remember that sometimes people who are going through mental health challenges can find it quite difficult to focus on heavy going stuff. And so, you know, things that are lighthearted, things that can easily be remembered or they can easily refer to. I love the promises. I love the promises in the Bible, and there are thousands and thousands of promises. I just pick 3. But, you know, there's so many Bible promises. I would say that if we spend time meditating on the word of God every day, if we picked up our Bible and turned perhaps to the Psalms, for example, turned perhaps to maybe a book like Proverbs, for example, it will help us. It will give us some guide, some wisdom, and it will soothe us. There are certain Psalms that are quite soothing. I don't know. I can't tell you any specific books per se at this moment in time. I'd say sometimes it might depend on how severe your mental health issue is, but certainly have a look at the Bible promises. Read scripture, read the Psalms, pray, and I believe that God's Spirit Himself will guide you to more and more resources that will help, and tomorrow, and even to people who will help as well, including professionals.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned earlier, well, this is not a question, but you mentioned earlier the 8 laws of health, and you mentioned New Start, and I would just like to point everyone back to the Ministry of Healing by Mrs. White. It's the book that we chose for our health book of the year, and many of the guidances that you just provide are actually mentioned in that book. And of course, the stuff that Mrs. White would have mentioned in the Ministry of Healing are coming directly from the Bible itself. So I think that would be a good book. And of course, ultimately, the Bible itself is the #1 go-to book for just about every challenge that we can face in life, not just the mental health challenges. Now, that was the last of our questions, Dr. Awuku, and I would like to extend my thank you to you for this presentation. It was very helpful. And even though as a medical doctor, there are some things that I was reminded about a while ago because I don't practice in that area. And I find it very helpful. And I think there were a lot of practical advice for people that would be very useful. There are a lot of things that I would be implementing in my personal life, and I'm sure the other participants would be implementing some of these things in their personal lives on a daily basis. And on the behalf of everyone from the Manchester South Seventh-day Adventist Church, I'd really, really, really extend our appreciation for this, as well as for your advice with those questions that were asked earlier on. So I would like to move on to the closing prayer at this time. And Lord, as we come before you today, we'd like to thank you so much for this presentation. There's so many people around the world and so many people in our churches who are suffering from mental health challenges. And the information that was shared here today would help us a lot in helping ourselves as well as individuals who might be suffering from the challenges. Lord, and we pray that we will be able to do a lot more as a church and as a community to address these mental health needs of everyone around us. We have the skills, we do have the expertise. It's just for us to now make that final push and overcome all the challenges that the great deceiver would want to put in our way from helping each other. In your name I pray. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely spending time.
Amen. Thank you, sis. Thank you. Okay, that brings the program to a close. We will try to endeavour to have more of these type of meetings where we will have certain topics that we'll go through in the future. That will be advertised on the church website. So I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone who's attended, and good night and have a good evening. Bye bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good night.
Hi, Carlton.
Hi, good night. Bye.
Hi.